Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show is brought to you by DKI Canada. Across the street, across the country. He is a legendary Canadian sports columnist, author, and broadcaster, Stephen Brunt. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Our guest today hails from Hamilton, Ontario. He attended the University of Western Ontario for his degree. Newspaper columnist, sports broadcaster. At the Globe and Mail, he was a lead sports journalist for 35 years. Co-host of Primetime Sports and Melnick in the Afternoon. He hosted Open Invitation, Stephen Brunt, the show, a best-selling author of 7 books. He's covered multiple Olympics for TV, radio, and print. He won the Michener Award for Public Service Journalism. He was a winner of the Canadian Screen Award, and he is a member of the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Welcome to the program, Stephen Brunt.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Good to see you. Good to hear you, man.
Yeah, it's good to see you, my friend. Been a while. So, okay, we like to begin at the beginning here. What led you into the realm of sports writing?
Wow, man, that's it goes back a long way. I was in school, I'll do the short version, but, I was a music guy, and I was at Western, I wanted to go into music, study music. I wasn't quite good enough to do that, but I did try. And, I started, as an alternative, I started writing about music when I was still in school. I was, for the university paper at Western, the Gazette, where I got to say, a lot of people have, Elliot Friedman came out of there. The Festchucks came out of there. A lot of people, Steve Simmons, so many guys who in our business who were at Western. And then while I was still in school, I started doing, became the music reviewer for the London Free Press and the paper in London, Ontario. And, did that for through my university career, did a master's in journalism at Western. And ended up getting hired by the Globe as a summer student first, and then, eventually full-time, but, first as an entertainment writer, as a music writer. And then in news, I went in and kind of did general assignment reporting. I covered some election campaigns, the federal election in 84, the provincial elections in 85 and 87. So I came to sports late, compared to most guys. Like most guys in our business are sports writers, and that's what they did from the beginning. But, aside from messing around a little bit on the radio station at Western, I hadn't done sports until I started writing some sports features for the Globe. They used to have a dedicated feature writer job, the sports feature writer job at the Globe and Mail. It was a different kind of newspaper world in those days. Right. And then the columnist job came open. And Trent Frayne, who was the columnist there, retired, although I think he was forced to retire at 65 in those days, which, given my advanced age now, I kind of wonder why they ever did that. But, and I applied for the job and I got it. There wasn't really a successor in place. And, I didn't really, know what I was doing or how to do it. I tried to do it my own way. I think I was pretty unsuccessful for the first couple of years trying to figure it out. But, but I settled into that job and did it for, 20, 27, 28 years, as the sports columnist there. And, that's an amazing, the same job Alan Abel had, the same job Jim Coleman had, Frayne, all these amazing people who, sat in that chair, and I got to see the world and cover everything, it's a dream job in a lot of ways. And again, newspapers in those days that's where people got their information. The Globe and Mail showed up on their doorstep first thing in the morning, and that's how they learned what had happened the night before. So, it's, I'm forever grateful to the Globe for all the many, many opportunities I had while I was there.
Yeah, that's great, man. You covered it very well there. Another guy who might have sat in that chair would be Scott Young, right?
Oh yeah.
Talk about your newspaper your music connection, and I remember Trent Frayne as well. And of course, the Globe and Mail was on my doorstep every morning too. So I remember those days, and always a great read. Always I really loved your stuff because it was always a little deeper than a lot of the stuff you'd see at other places, and it came from a little bit of a different angle. Is there anything specifically that you kind of focused on? Is there a style that you were looking to portray, I guess, in your writing?
I think because I came from news, and maybe because I came from music too, but definitely because I came from news, I think I took it, I did it a little differently than some of the guys who were lifers, career lifers, sports writers. And it was a time when there were a lot of, real world stuff was creeping into sports coverage, political stuff, business stuff, strikes, union stuff, collective bargaining, social issues, drugs. So I think I kind of approached it, a little more kind of from a real world point of view than from a fan point of view, especially and maybe too much that way, to be honest, in the beginning. And there were, there were guys who had pioneered that type of sports writing already. Robert Lipsyte at the New York Times, was one of my real idols that way. And so I was trying to kind of, do something, and again, something that would keep me, engaged, over the long term, because, otherwise it's kind of who won and who lost, right? And the story just repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. And, I certainly wrote that, covering, again, a lot of different teams and a lot of different championships and a lot of different situations. But I did like sinking my teeth into, the more newsier stuff every once in a while. Like, not, it's still kind of, sports is an entertainment, is entertainment. It's a distraction from the real world. So you don't want to, make it super heavy every day. But I think that was that's part of what I was trying to do.
Yeah, some realness to real world stuff to the sports world, and I really enjoy your column. I read it all the time. And how did you end up behind the mic?
Well, that we look, all the newspaper guys, we all, when we got the chance, we were moonlighting, right? We didn't make that much money. So, if somebody offered us a gig doing, a little bit of radio, or, appearing as a, guest on a TV show or something, and we got paid, we all jumped at it. Right. So, and I got to say, like, I wasn't super comfortable doing it at the top. I toyed around with a little bit of broadcast stuff earlier in my life, but it was not something that came naturally to me at all. I think the first really decent gig I got was I got invited on Dick Beddoes' show. The legendary madman Dick Beddoes had a show out of CH in Hamilton. And I remember the deal. I think it was right around the time I did the Shawn O'Sullivan book, and he had me, I was living in Toronto at that point, and Dick was taping the show in Hamilton. And they sent a limo to pick you up and take you back. And I got paid $500, which even now, like, that's a hell of a good deal for a TV hit.
Yeah.
And Beddoes told me, I remember Beddoes telling me that, he said, when I was a newspaper guy, he said, people always, I got used over and over again to do broadcast hits, and I, never felt I got paid fairly. So my deal now is if I get a newspaper guy on, I pay him the same as I, pay a hockey player or a football player or a baseball player. So that was kind of, but I think when I got into it, more regularly, it was with primetime sports, and, not McCown, but actually Howard Berger. I think Howard was subbing for Bob, and he brought me on as a co-host. That was the first time I ever hosted primetime, was with Howard.
Wow.
And then, and then I got invited, to be part of the roundtable, the regular Monday roundtable there. And when Bob was working with Jim Hunt as his co-host, and then I subbed for Hunt, and, kind of started to fill in, and, gradually more and more I was doing, I was a radio guy, when I wasn't the newspaper guy.
Right. And then Dan Schulman, came and did that show for a while. And I was on the show.
When Bob went to mornings.
When Bob went to mornings.
Yeah, people forget the Bob McCown morning show. I think Bob wants everybody to forget the Bob McCown morning show. Yeah, but he briefly was not that guy. And Schulman took over, and, I don't know whatever happened to Schulman. The kid kind of vanished after that.
I heard he did all right. I heard he landed on his feet. Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, we had Dan on the show too, and that baseball gig worked out pretty well for him. So he's got the great pipes, as you do, and it's kind of surprising that you didn't get into the business sooner, because you do have a great voice for you sound great behind the mic.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's like, it's nothing I did. It's just genetics, I guess. But and I'll tell you, the guy who actually kind of convinced me of that, and saying, to convince me to start to try and use it beyond just, do a co-host on a radio show thing, was Nelson Millman at the Fan, who was the PD at the Fan. And I worked with him on the Olympic Consortium in 2010. He was part of the structure of that Olympic Consortium. And that's, I did some narration there on a couple of pieces that, kind of changed my career and certainly changed my life. But Nelson was the guy who really sat me down and said, number one, you've got, use your voice. And number two, you've got to learn how to perform. This isn't right. This is a performance medium. And, you've got to learn how to actually sell it, write a script and perform a script. And, I owe Nelson a ton for that. He was, he kind of gave me the confidence, I think, to really try that.
Well, yeah, Nelson had an eye for talent. He brought a lot of guys into the fold that were turned out to be fantastic at their job, like Jan Schulman and others. And so yeah, that was a good call on Nelson's behalf. So, did you run into what kind of challenges did you run into along the way, either through the writing side of it or broadcasting side?
Well, I say, look, it's a dream gig, right? Like I always say that, like the job, when I talk to guys who were part of that era, we had the best job in the world, like we were, I literally saw any sporting event you could name, again, all over the world, somebody else paying the freight, incredible experiences. There was a great kind of a collegial, thing among the sports writers. We were all kind of in the same boat. We traveled together. We hung out together. We went out after, games. We had dinner together. We were working on hard deadlines, which, back in the day when it was about when the printing presses rolled, you had to get your story in on time. And, the technology was not what it is now. Like I wasn't working on a typewriter, but I was working on, very early versions of laptop computers. And, the Globe had notoriously early deadlines. So you had to be a real deadline guy. You had to be able to hammer out a column in 15 or 20 minutes sometimes. And, not knowing what the outcome of a game was going to be, that's, there's an art to that. And it was high stress. And, and then for a long part of my career, I was doing, at least working 2 jobs and doing some other stuff on the side. So, I was busy. I had a young family. My wife carried the freight a lot on the home front while I was traveling, going away to a World Cup for a month or an Olympics for, 3.5, 4 weeks. There wasn't just, a night here and a night there. But from my own point of view, man, I wish guys could live that life now. I try not to talk about it with young guys coming into the business because it's not like that anymore. And it's never going to be, but, we had a sweet gig.
Yeah, there was a long time where broadcast business and newspaper business was a lot of fun and very busy, and there's great demand for it and lots of opportunities, and not so the case today. I want to take you back. This is probably one of your earlier interviews that you did. You did an interview for a documentary on the 72 Summit Series, and Paul Patsku pulled that for us. Let's look at that, Vic.
And everybody in Canada went, holy smokes. Who are these guys and what are they doing and why are they skating that way and why are they beating us? It's like it's as if the little green men landed and came out and said hi. And you suddenly say, boy, we're not alone in the universe.
So that wasn't really that long ago. I thought it was something else. But anyway,
it's a while, man. I can see a couple of years. That was a couple of years ago, Joe.
It was a couple of years ago, yeah. So what do you remember about that, doing that documentary and being asked to do work like that?
Honestly, I don't remember anything. I have no idea. I have no memory of doing that doc at all, but I love Paul Patsku. I've worked with him on a bunch of projects. He's the best, man, and a great guy. But I have zero memory. I have no idea who was on the other side of the camera or when I did it. I can kind of tell by the haircut and the glasses, but other than that, I don't know.
Well, you touched on this earlier. You talked about your book about Shawn O'Sullivan, Mean Business, the rise and fall of Shawn O'Sullivan. Let's talk a little bit about, I know that, you and I believe we did some boxing commentary at one point. Do you recall that at all?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been covering the sport for a long time and of course, your exposure of corruption in the sport won you a Michener Award. Was that difficult for you to uncover what you found in that report?
Yeah, it was, because, because I had a lot of relationships in the boxing world, and I knew a lot of, I knew people, it was, look, it's the best reporting I'll ever do. I'll tell you that. I'm very proud of the reporting. I was, the Globe, I was part there. I think there were 3 different pieces in the Globe that were part of that Michener win. And, that's not something that I think I'm the only sports writer that's ever won it. And, I finished as runner up for what was then the Center for Investigative Journalism Award, the CIJ Award in Canada. Definitely was the only sports writer that's ever been, was ever acknowledged for that. So it kind of, I was acknowledged in the world of, kind of real journalism. Right. So I'm very proud of that. But no, it was tough because, it's a small world. The boxing world in Ontario is small, and, it was kind of all intertwined. And the guy who was the athletic commissioner was, kind of doing favors for guys who were promoting, and rules were ignored and safety stuff was ignored. And, but, it was clear, whether the reporting was clear cut, and it resulted in some real change. And, I don't think it changed boxing because boxing's boxing, but it, at least forced people to kind of pay attention to their own regulations and, take into account, safety, fighter safety. It's an incredibly dangerous sport. And, people are killed, people's, are damaged beyond repair sometimes in boxing. And, if you hang around the sport long enough, you see things that are wrong. And, again, it didn't change the world, but it for a while at least changed a little part of the world.
Right. I know it must have been difficult because I know you have real affinity for sport, and you've always been a big fan and love the sport. And it's so that challenge, having to, I guess, alienate yourself from some of the folks in boxing was probably difficult. I mean, standing up for what you believe is right at the time versus, sort of falling in line.
Yeah. Well, look, I have a, I would say I have a love-hate relationship with boxing because I do love it and I do enjoy it. And I've been lucky enough to see some amazing stuff, like going back to, the first heavyweight title fight I did was the first home Spinks fight in like 1985. I did all the Tyson fights. I saw him fight like 27 times live. I saw Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns and Marvin Hagler and, Lennox Lewis's whole career pretty much, like dream stuff for me, to be at ringside for, row 2 for Hagler Leonard. And like, how can you not love that? Right. But I've seen some bad stuff and I have seen people hurt and, it's a dirty business, man. It always has been. And so we're going kind of reporting on something, doing hard reporting on something that was that close to home, rather than just saying, no, I'm going to pass on this because I love boxing and I like some, these are people are friends of mine. I like to think it took some guts to do it. We showed you the book, Mean Business. And, Shawn was, he was amateur fighter, Canadian hero, beat Martinez to win the world championship, and was a hell of a fighter as an amateur, but it didn't work out in the pros. Was it the way he was handled? Was it the fact that perhaps he wasn't suited for the pros? What do you think? Was there ever a chance that Shawn O'Sullivan could have been a world professional champion? Well, I don't know. Like, I think he peaked as an amateur, and I think that he was, by the time he turned pro, he was actually a little past peak. He took a ton of punishment as an amateur. They didn't wear headgear, as amateurs in those days. And it was a different, amateur game now, man. If a guy gets wobbled, they stop, they give him a counter, they'll stop the fight. You look at that Armando Martinez fight, that was a war, and he took a tremendous amount of punishment. He won, but it was brutal. And yeah, I think he was kind of already a bit used up by the time he turned pro. And they could have managed, maybe they could have managed him like the Simon Brown, matching him with Simon Brown was at that stage in his career was a huge error, but that was Ray Leonard and his people who knew Simon Brown pretty well from Washington, D.C. They knew him better than anybody. They made that match and, and it was on NBC and NBC had no rooting interest in Simon Brown. They wanted the white kid to win, to be, to be frank about it. They were looking for a white hope kind of character. And Shawn was a great story. And, and he got destroyed that night. And really every time they took him up a level in opposition, he he couldn't handle it, and it got worse, and he got hurt, and he was still fighting, and he was hurt. And I think, there's a lot of people who's, got blood on their hands for that one. Look, and Shawn was an adult, like he chose to keep going. But, if you kind of think of how Shawn's life has gone since then, I think it's a Canadian tragedy. And I think it's an indictment of the sport. I think it really is. If, he brought a lot of people to the sport who wouldn't have watched it otherwise because he was a clean cut kid and, didn't have all that kind of dark, crooked kind of boxing vibe around him. But, I think if those people kind of knew how the story ended, they probably wouldn't love boxing a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was a ring announcer for that fight. And the premier was ringside. It was a different crowd back then at the Coliseum, and
yep,
it was
Simon Brown's world class. Simon Brown's
he won the world championship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he got starched pretty good later on in his career too, but it was a great fighter and too much for Shawn to handle at that time. But that certainly is part of the downside of boxing. And so you end up with Bob McCown having a great long run in primetime sports, and we talked about how that sort of came together with Howard Berger. Starting the what was it about you, the chemistry here? What was it about you two that made this click?
Well, that's it did click, and I when I started with him, Jim Hunt, Shaky was the co-host. I love Jim Hunt, as a person and everything. Like Jim was one of my favorite people in the world, and he had kind of his thing with Bob was he was kind of the old kind of outrageous guy who would say stuff, and and Bob would kind of play off that. Yeah, that great laugh, and he was and Hunt was a huge crazy character off air too. Like Jim was a lot of fun, man. I had a great time with Jim Hunt on the road a bunch of times. So I couldn't, if I was going to work with Bob, I wasn't going to be Jim Hunt, but I kind of, we kind of figured a way to kind of turn it around where, as it evolved, I guess, like, Bob was kind of the curmudgeon, and I was the younger guy at that point. And, and I think I was a pretty good straight man for him. Like I knew how to set him up, and I knew how he worked. I knew what he knew, and I knew what he didn't know. I understood the performance part of what Bob did. And again, he's as talented a broadcaster as I'll ever work with. He is really, really good in the moment, pulling stuff out of the air, asking a really good question, even if, he wasn't necessarily, that well versed in what had happened the night before or, anything else, right? He's really instinctive, that guy, and I give him credit for it. But I think I knew how to tee Bob up, how to push him a little bit every once in a while, how to stand up to him. And we had a really good working relationship, and again, I always, and he was the star and I was the number two. I was the sidekick. And, I liked that role. I really did. I didn't want to be the guy doing the ins and outs and the breaks and everything. I liked it off him.
Right.
And, would jump and participate in an interview in a different way and ask a different kind of question than Bob. And, it was, at its best, it was a lot of fun, and the show really crackled. And you had the feeling, in those days, again, at the peak, that it's, if something was going on in sports in Toronto, people went to that show. They wanted to hear what Bob had to say. They wanted to hear what was going on. It was kind of it was a real focal point. And, like it felt like everybody in their car stuck on the Gardner was listening to the show.
Mm. Yeah. The volume of listeners was astronomical for that show. Everybody listened to it. So, you guys had a little bit of a falling out, if I recall, but, is there anything specific? Any one thing? Any couple of things? Any what?
We had several falling. Like Bob had falling out. Like everybody who ever co-hosted that show, like no one really came out alive in the end. But I guess the big one was when I left. I went to when they started the Team Network. Chum started their own sports network,
right?
And and they hired me away. They, actually paid me real money, which to the fan certainly wasn't. And gave me a contract, which I didn't have. I didn't have a contract with the fan. It was like week show to show. And so I left because and there was really no, counter from the fan. It was just like, best of luck. So I went over and worked with Jim Van Horn, who was another great guy. They had a lot of resources, and they were going to kind of, they made a bunch of mistakes, and that's a whole other bit of broadcasting history that, you probably know about. But McCown, it was like McCown, and of course McCown would be like, honest to God, if somebody offered Bob $100 more, he'd leave because, Bob was all about Bob. But me leaving, for an actual, something close to fair compensation somehow offended him. So, once the team, I kind of backed out on the team before it went under because it was just it was too much. I was doing 3 hours a day, and I couldn't do that with radio, with my newspaper gig. So, and it was hard slogging. So I kind of eased myself out, but I was there the day, they pulled the plug. I just happened to be in the building. And, then I guess I had to serve my penance before I got allowed back on primetime. But, and then there, and again, there were a couple more, things where, but again, if you talk to anybody who worked with Bob, Shaky, back in the day, or Damian Cox, or, pretty much all of us, were on the outs at some point. And it's just kind of part of the gig.
Yeah, but it worked, man. The show worked for so long. And we actually had McCown on the show, and he talked about what happened to primetime sports and ultimately Rogers pulling the plug. And this is what he had to say.
We gave them a good show, a big show, and made them tens of millions of dollars. That's all we did. There was no animosity during that run. I got along with everybody. All of a sudden, I guess somebody came in and decided that I was making too much money. But I wasn't the only one. Nick Kiprios got fired ultimately. John Shannon got fired. There was somebody else that was big that got fired. And it was all monetary. It had nothing to do with talent. And if you look at what happened to that radio station since I left, it's been nothing but a disaster. Their ratings are way down, and their revenue is almost nothing. So the decision that was made, that decision was a bad decision.
What do you think about Bob's assessment?
Well, he was a very expensive line item, like, for sure. He was probably he was the highest paid broadcaster in Canada, doing anything. So, that probably did stand out to the Rogers guys when they went, I think part of, the larger thing that happened was that terrestrial radio kind of died, the world got smaller. That world got, Bob was still big, but, like Gloria Swanson, it was the pictures that got smaller, right? It was radio that got smaller.
Right.
And, the curve, the trend line was only going in one direction. It finally got kind of pushed over the cliff by the pandemic, like that. I think that's what really ended it. But, and suddenly you didn't have guys in cars listening to radio. They weren't in their cars because the pandemic and work at home, or they were listening to podcasts, or they're listening to satellite radio. They had a bunch of options, and, radio wasn't big enough to sustain, a guy like Bob and the amount of money he was making. So, and whether or not he'd lost his fastball a little bit by the end, didn't really matter, because again, I just don't think there was kind of anywhere to go. Like the guys, the TSN guys, the Overdrive guys, they also came along and they cut into Bob's audience, and they were younger and they were more tuned into some things than Bob was. They weren't kind of playing the nostalgia card. But even there, that show really, kind of exists now separate from the radio station. The radio, it exists on TV, and it's on the radio as well, but it's kind of a separate thing. Like, radio died, and it's still like you can see all the stations that Bell closed their Vancouver station. They which was a successful sports radio station. They shut down stations in other places. Rogers has kept the fan going, but I don't think, I don't think radio is front of mind for anybody in broadcasting anymore. Unfortunately, I love the medium, and but I think the kind of sports radio we all kind of, lived with and enjoyed all those years is kind of it's over.
Yeah. Which is sad because it's Hayes Noodles and the O-Dog, they have a great show. It's fun to listen and it's good, and the fan, perhaps they want to keep the sports radio format because they have to have a lead into the Jays games, right? I mean, they have to have their property, so it's probably gonna last a while. But boy, has it ever changed.
Yeah, and there's guys doing. I gotta say, there's guys doing really good work on the Fan. Like it's, I think Kiprios and Justin Bourne are doing a great show. Blair and Barker do a great baseball show. My Ben Ennis, who I worked with at the last part of my time at the Fan, is really good in the mornings. I think there's still good radio being produced. I just think it's kind of going into a vacuum now, and it's, it exists almost as much to be kind of fill-in TV programming and podcasting as it does to be radio, in the old school radio listened to in your car. Like, I think that's the least important kind of reason for that content now.
Yeah, and I find myself, honestly, I listen to a lot of stuff on Sirius XM. I mean, just because I can turn on. I want to listen to some hockey. I can turn on the NHL network. I want to listen to the PGA coverage. I can do that. I mean, so the options have changed so much, and it's it's just it's a dying thing. So unfortunate. You wrote the book on Wayne Gretzky. What were you surprised to learn about him?
It was interesting exercise, kind of followed on the Bobby Orr book I did. And it's kind of, to me, it's kind of a companion piece that's like the sequel to it, because they kind of, the two careers kind of almost touch, two different generations of kind of hockey icons. And, I think kind of getting into the kind of the mechanics and the backstory of the trade, obviously, and understanding a bit more about, I think people understand it now, maybe. Well, again, with Wayne in the last year, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, obviously. And, people aren't feeling that warm about him in Canada anymore, but, just how, I know he cried, and that's the title of the book, right? Wayne Gretzky's Tears, but, right. He wanted to go, he was happy to go to LA. He was comfortable in LA. He was, that was really where a lot of his friends were and where his life was, even when in those last years with the Oilers. And, Pocklington's always the great villain in the piece. And, but, I think Wayne was pretty darn happy with that transaction. And, so I love the character of Bruce McNall, who I've written about and done documentary work around for many times. He is one of the great. He's like a character from fiction, in sport, and he's a crook and a charmer and a con man. A completely invented biography, but if he sat down beside you, he'd make you smile. And so Bruce's whole role in that, and again, the fact that the NHL at that point basically handed him the keys to the league and said, "You're the smartest guy here. Why don't you take over?" And he hired Gary Bettman, which is one of my favorite little facts of all time. That is the chairman of the board of governors. He's the guy that hired Bettman. I don't think Bettman has that in his resume.
Right, that's crazy. So, you wrote the book on Gretzky. You wrote the book on Bobby Orr. Who better to ask who is the greatest of all time?
Well, I look for it's always the guy who, like somebody smarter than me said this, but it's whoever was the greatest when you were 10 years old, right? Because that's kind of how we remember the past, and we kind of mythologize our own past. And so for me, that's Orr. And I did see him, even as a kid, a very young kid, saw him playing junior hockey in Hamilton when he was playing for the Oshawa Generals, and watched his career play out and listened to the crowds boo him at Maple Leaf Gardens every time he touched the puck. And, and I've never, still haven't seen anybody who could skate the way he could. And, now dominated the game. Now you've got to kind of look at the era and the points totals, and expansion really changed. The huge expansion going from 6 to 12 teams. Everybody's point totals went up. Those 6 teams weren't NHL teams on the other side. So people a lot of guys had amazing success in that era. in terms of goals and points. But he only played 10 years, and a lot of that he played with a knee that was, that today they could have fixed, but in those days they couldn't fix. There's no arthroscopic surgery. You kind of wonder what his career would have looked like if it had gone 15 years and he'd been, healthy through the whole thing. But different game. Again, you watch an original six game on, ask Paul Patsku to show you one. Watch an original six game on tape, and it's a different sport. Guys are playing long shifts, and kind of the game's way slower. And from a skill point of view, like it's entirely possible the greatest player who's ever lived is Connor McDavid. Like I'm not sure I've seen anybody better in terms of his skills and his physical ability. Like he's jaw dropping, and Orr was a strong guy and obviously a great skater. Gretzky, physically was not an imposing guy and not, not great at any one part of the game except for his brain, his hockey brain.
Right.
But a slight guy, not the greatest shot, not the greatest skater. But I watch Connor McDavid and I feel like I'm seeing some next gen. Like I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody who can do what he does. So it's. It may well be that by the time his career wraps up, it's a consensus. He's be nice if he won a Stanley Cup or two, because we seem to think the team accomplishments have got to be part of it. But I think he would have been the dominant player in any year he played in.
Yeah, I mean he is something special. If you were to diabolically design the perfect hockey player, he might be the guy, right? He's the guy. Yeah. I think it's your most recent book, Brian Burke. I'm not sure. I think it is, right? Well, we have Burkey on the show, and he talked about the You Can Play initiative. Let's just roll that first. We'll just have a chat about that.
We've got two choices. I remember talking to the other three kids. I said, we've got two choices now as a family. Either we move ahead and make Brendan's memory important, and we move ahead as a family, no one moping, no one sitting crying by the side of the road, or we march ahead. And I said, and I'm marching ahead, and so are you. And everyone agreed, we're just going to march ahead. And then we said, let's figure out a way to memorialize Brendan's passing and turn it into something positive, which was the You Can Play project, which my kids started. Patrick did most of the work on it, but that's You Can Play is basically our family legacy, and on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community. It's done some great work. Basically, the message is, if you can play, if you're good enough to play, doesn't matter what church you go to, doesn't matter who you go home with, doesn't matter what color your skin is, if you can play, if you're good enough to help our team win, you can play. So if you can play, you can play. And it's been a wonderful thing. It's been very therapeutic for me, obviously, to watch this growth and see the NHL support of it and the other teams, other leagues support of it. It's been a great help, I think, to young people that are coming out, dealing with these issues.
So, having written a book on Brian Burke, what did you come away with? Like, what did you take away from that?
Well, that's different than the other, because I worked with Brian, so it was Brian's book, and I helped Brian write his book. I love Brian. Back when I was writing a column and doing, the radio thing, and he was many of his various jobs with the league or with teams, like we disagreed about a bunch of stuff, and and I remember having kind of some pretty spirited debates with him on air about certain things. And but the one thing I always like about Burke is that he fights fair. Like if and afterwards, it's not like he walks out in a huff if he said something he didn't like. He's an honest kind of debating partner. But he came to me. He was working at Sportsnet and on the Fan, and he talked. He knew I'd help some other people out with their books, and so he wanted to talk to me about a book. And he had started writing it himself, and he showed me a manuscript. And I told him, well, you write like a lawyer, because he's a lawyer, and he writes like a lawyer. He said, "There's the content's great, but you're not a writer. You write like a lawyer." And I kind of talked him through the book business and said, well, here's the different ways, you might be able to do this, and et cetera, et cetera. And he said, well, why don't I hire you to write the book? And I said, well, you don't have to. Like, that's not the point. I'm just, we're just having a conversation. I'm a colleague, and I respect you. And I just kind of, it's I know more about that business than I'm more experienced in it than you do. So he said, no, I want you to write the book. So we worked out a deal where I would work with him on the book. And, Brian approaches everything like head on, man. Like his work ethic is off the charts. And I've never worked with anybody like that. So, it was, okay, we're going to do 2 hours today. We're going to do 3 hours tomorrow. And, you better be ready the next day because, I'm ready and let's go. Like there was no breaks, no pauses. We worked really hard on that book. He's an incredibly smart man, as everybody understands. He's also dead honest. He is, and he was brave, like talking through the stuff with him about Brendan was really hard for him. And, and I said, the more, when we got into it, I said, look, the more you can put on the page, the further you're willing to go, the better this will be. But I'm going to respect your wishes. You've been through something far worse than most of us have ever been through, thank God. And, you deal with it in the way you want to deal with it. And he, again, head on. And I'll never forget those sessions. We were tucked away in an office in the Rogers building there, and Brian going through hour by hour, what that experience had been like for him. And it was really painful. But it's all there on the page in the book, and, I think it's a great book. That's a tribute, not to me, that's a tribute to Brian Burke because it's all him. But he was willing, he was really willing to let it go and really willing to kind of put himself, make himself uncomfortable, talk about tough parts of his life, beyond that. And, man, he's an incredible dude. And the book did really well. I got to say people, and I think it allowed people, because, not everybody, people see Burke on TV sometimes, or they, he can seem kind of blustery and all that. And I think there were people who, thought that he's kind of a blowhard, but I think a lot of people, read that book, even though at the end of the book, Brian said, and again, I talked, this was what he wanted. He said, essentially, I don't care if you like me after reading this book. It's there in print. But I think people did like him, in a different way after they read the book. I think people understood him a lot more. And I say, I'm really, really proud of that one. And I value my relationship with Brian, that's very important to me.
Yeah, and the book is amazing for sure. And one of the reasons I really wanted to read it is because we've lost a son as well, so we've gone through that tough stuff. And when people speak up about it, and when we talk about Spencer, it's helpful for us, and it's helpful for other people to know that you've gone through that journey. So we had a nice discussion about that. It was excellent. So thank you for doing that. It was beautiful. So.
Well,
another one of your books,
Brian.
Yeah, no, I did for sure. Another one of your books, CFL 100 Years of Grey Cups. What prompted you to write this book? This is one of your earlier works. And do you still follow the league? Are you still a CFL fan?
Yeah, I still do follow the league. I'm actually doing some work with the Ticats right now, which is fun, my hometown team. So I'm enjoying that. Yeah, that book, that was kind of a collab between the publisher and the league, and coming up on the 100th Grey Cup. It was fun for me. I got to be a little bit like Paul Patsku. I got to be a bit of a historian, and kind of and Paul helped me with that, of course, as well as a researcher. But digging into some of the archival stuff, and kind of picking out finding a way how to tell that story, and picking out specific games and people. I say growing up in Hamilton, my family, we were, they were my number one team, the Ticats. That was the team in Hamilton. That was it. And, I went to games, been going to games since I was a little kid. And I've had to write tough stuff, talk about writing tough stuff about boxing. I had to write some pretty tough stuff about the CFL over the years, because it looked like it was going to, go out of business a bunch of times. And, the Ticats, my hometown team went bankrupt at one point, right? They didn't have an owner.
Right.
So, there's, it's, and I don't know what the future of the league is at this point. It's a huge challenge. I think Stu Johnson's going to be a great commissioner, but I think there's a lot of challenges there for them in the marketplace, especially in the big cities. But no, I love the game. Grew up with the game. So yeah, it was a blast being able to do that.
And the game is still fun. Like, your Ticats, a couple of nice wins recently against Montreal and Toronto, and I love the new uniforms too. It was pretty sharp in that home game. Yeah. So now
that I'm working for them, I got a real rooting interest. So there you go.
I think Stu Johnson's going to do a great job. But like you said, there's a lot of challenges there. Moving forward. It's so much fun though. I mean, the game itself is a hoot, and if you can get people to watch it, that's the big key. And I think probably it's getting the younger generation to have a look, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's a big, that's a huge challenge. It's been a challenge for decades. So best of luck to them. Again, I hope so. It's worth preserving.
So you had a show, Open Invitation with Stephen Brunt. Great show. You interviewed Dana White, one of your first interviews. He was talking about the significance of getting UFC on ESPN. Let's roll a little bit of that.
Look at where this started and saying, well, this sport's going to land on ESPN, which is still the people's go-to, in the United States of the sports, it's still their go-to. It is as mainstream as you could possibly be, and this massive commitment and partnership with the worldwide leader. Like, that seemed to me to be kind of the culmination of something in terms of UFC.
100%. And, obviously anybody who gets involved in sports in the United States, your goal is to be covered by ESPN, let alone be on ESPN. And it's a big deal, and it's something that you got to do, and hopefully someday it happens, but you don't realize how big it really is until you're on it. These guys are very, very good at what they do. And now with streaming, people all over the world will be able to watch this. And this was my dream one day, where I say this all the time, but it's a fact. And if you didn't believe me 15 years ago, you have to believe me now. I don't care what color you are, what country you come from, or what language you speak. We're all human beings, and fighting's in our DNA, man. We get it and we like it.
What's the takeaway from Dana? What did you learn about him?
Well, I've interviewed him a ton of times, over the years, going way back. And I wrote about the UFC even before Dana was in it. I saw I think it was UFC 7 in Buffalo. That was before that was before Dana and the Zuffa guys took over. And catch the evolution of the sport and the business and the legitimization of it, which I've always been fascinated by, right? Because they were kind of outlaws at the beginning, no rules, no holds barred. It was a bit of a freak show, and but again, Dana can play a lot of characters. As he can be really crude and drop a bunch of F-bombs for a certain audience, and act like a bit of a thug, and then he can be like that, right? It really kind of sees he's really smart, and he can play to the corporate guys too. And I'm not sure whether it's if it was all his idea, but the path that they took, which was to get it legitimized, to get it recognized by athletic commissions, to play by rules and kind of mainstream it a bit. Well, and it's same on the flip side, still kind of keeping this, guys in t-shirts and shaved heads attitude thing that plays to their audience. That's, I was totally skeptical when, at the beginning when he said, this sport is going to be a global sport. And, now it hasn't overtaken the NFL or any of the other things he's probably said over the years. But, I thought it would always be peripheral, and it's not peripheral. It's mainstream. People talk about it in a mainstream way, and it's on mainstream networks. And, in Ontario, they hired Tom Wright, the former CFL commissioner, the squarest dude in the world, to be their front guy, because they wanted to calm people down and, governments about it and say, look, no, this isn't worse than boxing, and it's not savagery, and it's not human cockfighting and all of that stuff. It's legit. And they won that battle. And, so yeah, I'd that it's the only, it's this in my lifetime, it's a sport that was, essentially invented, combining a bunch of different things, and a sports business that was invented from scratch that now, it's not one of the big four, but it's there, it's bigger than boxing. And, I say White is he's a street guy from Boston. He's got some weird connections there. He goes to Vegas, reinvents himself, hooks up with these two kind of mysterious casino owner dudes who actually are the money people. And they sold that company for what, $2 billion or something when they sold out. So yeah, no, I love the story, and I always find him and he knows, when I first talked to him, I was the guy from the Globe and Mail, the business paper, the square paper in Canada. I wrote boxing. He knew that. And he knew exactly how to talk to me versus, say, talking to some guy from a, UFC fanzine or podcast or something. Like he knew his audience. And I always thought that I kind of tip my cap to him, man. Like you get it.
Yeah, he's a smart guy, streetwise, incredibly smart, right? So you talked about UFC, you talked about a lot about boxing. What's your favorite sport to cover or to watch?
Geez, I don't know. I watch a lot of baseball. I love baseball. And I really do enjoy baseball probably more and more as time goes on. I have tickets. I go to a lot of games when I'm home. I'm not there in the summer, but I do go to a lot of games. I watch football, and the fights I still watch occasionally, but not the same way that I used to. But I would say baseball and football are my one and two. I like track. From covering all those Olympics. I love soccer. And I've, covered a lot of soccer over the years. I covered multiple World Cups and Euros, and very excited about the World Cup coming to Canada. Very excited about what's going on with the men's national team right now. So I do, I watch a ton of soccer. I was in Liverpool with my son in Anfield last year we've been there a few times. And so, yeah, and I watch it for fun now, right? I don't have to bang out a deadline story. So I enjoy that too.
No skin in the game. It's nice. You just be a fan. So you got your summer home in Newfoundland. Clearly love it there. You've spoke very highly about, chatted about this. So Paul was able to find some video of you fishing with your son. One of the great pastimes you have, of course. And what brought you out to the Rock?
Well, it's, fishing originally. Yeah, I actually came out to write a story for a magazine about fly fishing, and kind of fell in love with the place. And we've been here for 25 years now. We bought a little house, and it's a beautiful part of the world. I love being here in the summertime when it's not super hot like Ontario. It's I'm in the middle of a national park. There's great hiking here. There's there's the salmon fishing there. That's a blast. I do that almost every day, and I've got great friends here. We have a lot of relationships here. I'm work on a literary music festival here that we've been running for 22 years. That's a lot of kind of my other secret life. And I wouldn't be anywhere else. I'm out here for this year. I'll be out here for about 3.5 months. So it's fantastic. Yeah, I love it.
You've been a big advocate for mental health, mental wellness. Is this good for your mental wellness? And tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it's good for everything. I physically, mentally, having just kind of like I work, but it's not like I'm not working because I'm actually kind of busy out here this year. And I've been out here in years when I was working for the newspaper or working in radio. There's a lot of things you can do remotely now you couldn't do in those days. But I just find it's good to kind of turn the page, and it's not a vacation. It's like we move our life out here, and continue to live our life out here in different. Kind of different surroundings with different people. But the air is clean, the water's clean. I can smell the pine trees and smell the ocean. And and it slows you down. It's no traffic jams. There's, it forces you to kind of take a breath. And I think that's been good for me.
We're partnered with a group called Believe, Become, Be You. It's a mentorship program for kids from 10 to 17, inspired by the late Sean Gindy, and it's led by Papa Jack Gindy. What's a message you might have for any kids who might be struggling to find their way in this world today?
Well, boy, that's a huge question, Joe.
Yeah.
I think the really simplistic one is that it does get better sometimes, like it does get better. Sometimes you can seem like you're in a dead end, and, it's things change over the course of your life. opportunities present themselves. It's not, especially when you're a teenager, and you can kind of feel like it's all about right now. And, we all kind of blossom at different times in our lives, and kind of find ourselves at different times in our lives. And you got to kind of, have faith that, your own timetable is, your timetable is your own. You don't have to peak, and everything doesn't have to fall into place when you're 15 years old. And I think sometimes kids feel like that now, that especially, and I'm not just now, I think it's always been like that a little bit, that, you kind of think, oh my God, it hasn't happened for me, and I haven't, found a direction, or I haven't found a relationship, or I don't look the way I want to look, or whatever it is. Look, there's twists and turns and bumps in the road along the way, but, and look, I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna about it. I know there are, bigger issues and bigger hurdles that, are not easily overcome, but, some things do resolve themselves in time.
Mm-hmm. I know. Many times in my life, I come to a place where I feel like it's stuck, and it feels a little bit hopeless, and I feel a little bit helpless. And, you wonder if this particular painful situation is going to end, but then, just around that next corner, there could be something really, really good coming along. And like you said, just keep the faith that something will happen, and it probably will, and it will, I think. It will get better for sure. And that's a tough thing to just accept sometimes, or believe, but it's the truth. And the poop storm that we're in right now might be just a really temporary thing. And good stuff is coming. Yeah, I'm not going to vouch for where the world is right now, because I think we're in a horrible place. But your personal life, that's a different. Yeah. Your own life is a different thing, and and some of that other stuff you can't control anyway. Yeah, very, very good. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for taking this time to join us. It's been awesome catching up, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Yeah, me too, Joe. Good seeing you, and good to reconnect. It's I have fond memories of some of the especially fight time, man. You and I were two of the fight guys in Toronto, and I always enjoyed those years. Yeah, we had some good times, buddy. Thank you so much. All right, when we come back, man. Bob McCown versus Bob Costas. Okay, we'll do that comparison. In 1992, the best locally owned restoration companies came together with one goal: to make disaster recovery better for Canadians. And to this day, DKI remains one of the only 100% Canadian-owned disaster restoration groups in the market. Fire, flood, or storm damage. When things go wrong, the right help makes all the difference. With the right tools and local expertise, we handle everything from emergency response to full-scale restoration, getting homes and businesses back on track the right way. Because a home is more than four walls, a business is more than a building, and recovery is about more than repairs. When you choose DKI, you're choosing a company that's put Canada first since 1992. Locally owned, nationally backed, Canadian through and through. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. Hearing loss doesn't have to mean missing out. At Hear Canada, we help you take charge with a complimentary hearing assessment, because confidence starts with clarity. Discover hearing aids, accessories, and expert care at your local hearing center. Not sure where to start? Our Hearing Health Guide has the basics for you or a loved one. It worked for us. Book your free assessment today at herecanada.com. Conditions may apply.
I started at sports at Global in 1981. I got fired from radio, and they sold the company was sold by Foster Hewitt to Telemedia, and the first thing they did was get rid of me. And so after a period of time, I got an offer from Global, and it was to do a horse racing show. And I went in and I talked to them, and I said, look, I don't really want to do a horse racing show, but I'll do a general sports show if you want. I'll do a half hour every night. Now, this was ESPN had just started, I think. And I hadn't seen ESPN, but I knew that they were doing half-hour sportscasts on that channel. TSN didn't exist, and Sportsnet didn't exist. But I said, look, I'll do this if you want. And fortunately, they said yes. So we started Sportsline in 1981. I did from 11:30 to 12 o'clock every night. And we had nothing to fall back on, nothing to look at and see what other people were doing. We had to make it up all by ourselves. So I think we did a pretty good job. We got a big audience. We had over 1 million people a night. And advertising was full. The breweries competed against each other for sponsorship. So it worked out well.
Yeah, so we have a clip here from a show you did in June of 1982, I believe. Let's roll that, Vic. Yeah.
The city of St. Catharines is outraged, not because of high unemployment, high taxes, high interest rates, but because they may be on the verge of losing a hockey team they never really had. Tonight on Sportsline, we'll give you the developments that led up to this story and meet the one-man ringleader who's trying to change some minds any way he can. We'll also take a look at the World Cup and how international sporting events can be reduced to political battles. We'll show you this year's American League Baseball All-Stars as announced tonight. Latest on the Argos as they prepare for their opener on Thursday. The Blizzard as they get ready for the Montreal Manic. All the scores, horse racing, and more. It's all to come in the next 30 minutes here on Sportsline.
You know, it's funny, when I was watching, I was thinking to myself, Bob sounds a little bit like a young Bob Costas, and I remember coming to Toronto for a job interview. Yeah. In April of 1984, I came to Toronto for a job interview, and I remember turning on Sportsline and Global and watching your show. I couldn't believe that you guys had a half an hour to fill every night. Did you have enough? Material?
Oh yeah, every night. Oh yeah, it was no problem whatsoever. Now, the Costas reference is interesting because at one point while I was at Global, I got offered a job. Well, to apply for a job at NBC. Brian Gumbel went to the Today Show. He left NFL Today, went to the Today Show. And so they needed a host for that. So I had an agent in the U.S., and he put my name in. I guess there were about 1,000 people who applied for the job. Anyway, they got down to 3, and I was one of them. And I don't know who the other third guy was, but I didn't get the job. But the guy who got the job was Bob Costas. That was his first. That's where he really started, because he was in St. Louis at KMOX doing local stuff. This was his first national appearance was on that show. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't get the job. I stayed at Global, but, at least my name was referenced with Costas. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that is pretty good, being a finalist. And on the whim of a program director, we might have seen Bob McCown on all those NBC broadcasts instead of Bob Costas, right? It could have.
Yeah, he might have, but he didn't, right?
So tell me, when you look back at that kid Bob from 1982, what are your thoughts?
Well, the weird thing was the beard, right? I was the first guy to have a beard on TV all the time. And I didn't do that for any particular reason. I had a beard, and they said it was okay, so I kept it. My hair was pretty long. I've always had longish hair, I guess. So that wasn't a big deal. But people used to talk about the beard a fair bit.
Well, I suppose if NBC had hired you and they said shave out the beard, you might have done that, right?
For the money, yeah, I would have. You bet.
Discover the secret to timeless vitality at Renew Medical Center in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Our specialists unravel the science of aging, tailoring plans to defy its effects. Experience cutting-edge regenerative therapies such as stem cells and exosomes, addressing aging at its core.
It's a wonderful spot, and I highly recommend it for whatever you may need, whether you just want to feel better, you want to look better, have basically a quality of life, just to ramp it up a little bit as we age.
Liberate yourself from aging-related concerns, where accountability, technology, and passion for regenerative medicine converge. Begin your path to peak health and wellness with us. Schedule your appointment today at renewpv.com and elevate your quality of life.
Parents, what's the biggest fear for kids 10 to 14? A future they think they can't handle. At Believe, Become, Be You, we know confidence in the future is a habit we can build. Our course doesn't just prepare kids for the future, it seeds them with skills they will use now. For a limited time, the I Believe in Me Foundation is offering the first 1,000 kids and their parents 1 year free access. This priceless opportunity will save you over $2,000. This isn't just a course. It's a journey in developing life-enhancing skills that will grow with your child, fostering gritty minds, creative futures, and better bonds. Get signed up now at BelieveBecomeBeYou.com. That's BelieveBecomeBeYou.com.
And we want to thank all the folks who make this show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. Thank you for your support of Canadian sports, and we highly recommend them all. A reminder, the show is available on iTunes, Spotify, Breaker, wherever you get your podcast from. Also, check out all the latest shows on YouTube. Our past great shows are on there as well. Clips, shorts, and like and subscribe. Doesn't cost you a dime. Our socials are at Joe Tilley on Instagram and Threads. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show on Facebook and LinkedIn. Thanks once again to Stephen Brunt for joining us. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more. Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in their early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678. I'm Joe Tilley, and this fall I want you to join me for the adventure of a lifetime in Peru. We're talking about a 9-day guided journey through some of the most awe-inspiring sights on Earth, starting at just $19.99. We'll explore Lima, Peru's lively capital. You'll experience rich history, beautiful architecture, and world-class cuisine. You'll also wander the vibrant streets of Cusco, where Inca heritage blends seamlessly with colonial charm, and visit the stunning Sacred Valley, known for its dramatic landscapes, ancient Inca ruins, and charming traditional villages. And the big moment? We'll ride the scenic Inca train to spend a night in Machu Picchu village, waking up early to witness a magical morning light over the ancient citadel, a once-in-a-lifetime experience you'll never forget. Craving more? Extend your trip with a stay at a luxury Amazon lodge, or visit Lake Titicaca and meet the locals on the floating islands. This all-inclusive package covers international and domestic flights, expert guided tours, entrance fees, and stays at hand-picked hotels. And here's the kicker. Book now to receive a free upgrade to first-class boutique-style hotels and a direct flight from Toronto on selected dates. Don't miss it. Let's discover the magic of Peru together. Rooted in 60 years of tradition, Sleepy Hollow is a private golf club with a friendly community of members just minutes from Toronto. With mature trees and rolling fairways, Sleepy Hollow provides a challenging and enjoyable experience for passionate golfers. Enjoy great golf, amazing dining, and a picturesque patio second to none. Visit sleepyhollowcountryclub.com.